If I can get everyone's attention real quick. You all sat in the back because you thought these names were taken by somebody.
But they're not.
That was for a different class that was in here, and they taped their name tags down. So you in the back, if you want to move up, there are some seats up front. You can hear and see a little bit better. We'll call the meeting to order of the Capital Program Advisory Committee at 6 o'clock. And I entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the January 20 meeting 2026. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? By Mona, second by Breanne. Any discussions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes? If not, I'll signify the favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. Ayes, carry it. The next items 3, 4, and 5 are all kind of all together. They're different topics, but Trudy's going to be the one going over those as we go along the way. So if we can, we'll have plenty of time for questions and stuff after that. But Trudy's going to give us items 3, 4, and 5, debt capacity, tax impact, the recommendations from staff on funding, and also the timing of the bond election, things of that nature. But we will make sure we have some time at the end for questions for her as we go along. So, for anything else, Trudy, you're up. You have everybody's undivided attention.
Okay.
A lot of fun numbers tonight, so pay close attention to this one.
It's everybody's favorite, right? And everyone sat in the back so you can see the numbers perfectly and all of that. Okay, so we talked back in August, and in August we talked about the fact that we were going to present you all with a lot of projects and that we'd come back with different options and recommendations and so on and so forth. And so that's what we're going to do this evening. We're going to wrap up all the projects that have already been presented to you all. We're going to go through a little bit of the history of the city's debt issuances from the past, again, review projects that are under consideration. We're going to talk about the dollar amount of those projects. We're going to look at some benchmark city bond elections that have happened in the area. We're going to focus on cities and city bond elections. We're going to talk about debt capacity and also the debt tax rate in terms of scenarios for a debt issuance. Shown on your screen are the city's bond elections dating back to 1985. So these are listed by proposition. So, for example, you see how in 2003, there's several different ones listed there. They all went on the ballot at the same time, but they were separate considerations. You can see the total dollar amount here, the last one, of course, being in November of 2020. We did have one for a maintenance facility that was not approved back in 2003. I know there was at least one question as we were doing tours of the service center as to how did the service center get to this point? Well, we asked the citizens if we could do a revamp, and in 2003 the answer is not yet. But you can see all the other ones were approved. I did include a link here in case anyone is interested. We have on our city website a list of a lot of debt information, so if you're ever curious and you want to see more about what we have had going on and information about how much debt we have outstanding, etc., wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to see that information. These are details of the 2003 proposition that did not pass. So I wanted to make sure you guys had full disclosure of, at that time, what was provided to the citizens in terms of explanation for the project scope itself. We were asking at that time for a total of $1 million in order to do facility improvements. So you can see it talked about the date that the building was constructed in 1987, how repairs are having to be performed at various locations, really needing to have some expanded office space and so on and so forth. So again, this was from 2003, but wanted to make sure you guys knew what was on the ballot. Since we have had a bond election, a lot has changed in terms of inflation. We have factored that into the project costs that we're bringing forward to you. This is really just to highlight how significant inflation has changed compared to historical norms after the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically for construction materials, there is a huge change in how much it costs to build things. So the numbers that you all are going to see are certainly after the effect of those changes. So let's go through what projects we've been discussing over the last several months. We'll start with fire station number 2. Remember, there are a total of 2 fire stations that we've been discussing. So for fire station number 2, the total proposed cost, the total estimated cost for that is right at $12.1 million. So we've got both cost here for construction itself. That includes engineering design, all the things related to that, demolition, getting the buildings commissioned, and then we've also got to do all of our outfit for furniture and other things included in that as well. Fire station number 3 is slightly larger, and so the cost here is going to be a little higher than that. It's at $14.1 million, and again, this includes building construction, demolition, so on and so forth. And these are the same numbers you all saw when the projects were being presented. So now we've got the library. There was lots of discussion around what the scope of work may look like for the library. So there's actually 4 slides with 4 different scopes of work that we want to be sure to cover tonight. This is going to provide you all with a breakdown should you want to consider the phases separately, that you understand what will be included with that, both in terms of square footage and in terms of cost. So we'll start with the community room expansion. This would require to have a renovation to the bathroom. Remember, we talked about the fact that once you're increasing the overall number of people that can be in that room, that is going to cue code changes for the restroom facility as well. So that amount is included, as well as the southwest corner build out. So if that room were to expand, also outside of its current square footage. And then again, we've got to do furniture, fixtures, and also shelving. So for this first phase, this cost is right at $10.7 million. The next one is what we call the Senate Bill 412 compliance. The reason it's referenced that way is because in this last session, there was a bill passed that does require there to be no access to materials that could be considered harmful to children. And so to comply with that bill, this scope of work would include separating the children and adult circulation. So this would put one on one floor and one on the other floor to make sure that we don't have that overlapping access. It also could include expansion of the children's area, and then again, furniture, fixtures, and shelving. So for just this particular phase, that estimated cost is at $7.6 million. The circulation workroom expansion would be about 1,500 square feet. Again, we would have some shelving and things that needs to go into that change, but that estimated cost is at $735,000. And for the final library consideration, these were sort of other things that came up during the discussion, including the outdoor terrace, as well as expansions for the elevators. This would include 1 replacement and also 1 additional elevator, and that total cost is a little north of $1 million. Everyone's favorite topic, streets. Okay, so when we go through these street presentations, a couple things I want to point out. One is that you've got a couple of handouts at your place that are going to give you this same information. It's formatted a little bit differently, perhaps a little more easily for you all to see the information. We're going to go over major streets first. And on your handout, which coordinates to what you see here on the screen, through the red line is what we're going to discuss first. Then it's going to go through the blue line, and then it's going to go through the green line. Does that make sense? So we're going to coordinate by color, what's shown on the screen and also in your handout. Your other handout is going to be for residential streets. So we'll start with majors, and then we'll go over to residential streets. So for that first priority section through the red line, there's a total of 16 streets. You can see here the street name as well as the length. Then you see the estimated cost per street. So for major streets only, through that first section of the red line, we're about $38 million. Okay. And if we were to go then to the next section, which would be the blue priorities, that adds an additional 7 streets. The total for those 7 streets is at 13.5. The cumulative total, so if you did that first section through the second section, you're right at about $51 million. Yes, sir.
The previous slide, where it talks about Chapman, is Chapman being done in 2 phases? Like the last bond that we did, Chapman was supposed to be resurfaced from like Ruth Snow to like the park?
Yes.
And then so is this, since this is in 2026 bond, is this from the park?
It's the remaining portion from, I believe, the set.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, on your sheet there as well, Chapman is number
4?
Number 4, and I believe it says from Brookshire Trail to Smithville Road. So that is the remaining portion of Chapman.
I didn't know that, so that was,
Nope, no
that's
worries.
good news because I travel on that road every day.
What was the total on the second page?
13 something.
Yep, 13.5 for these additional 7 streets, but a cumulative total of 51.5 million. And then finally through the priority green streets. This is an additional 6 streets. Those project costs are 11.6 million for a total of 63 million for major streets. Okay, there's a few more streets that are listed under that. We provide the information to you all for disclosure for the purpose of looking at what we would look to propose for discussion only. Is going to go through that green line. Okay, and now we're going to switch over to our residential streets. So for the first section, going through the red line, 18 total streets at $13.1 million. There are 5 additional streets when you get to the priority blue section, and that is at 4.5 million for a cumulative total of 17.7 million. And then we've got the priority green streets, which adds an additional 10. Those are at 3.4 million for a cumulative total of 21.1 million for just the residential streets. So if we put this all together and we're looking at residential streets, major streets, all the priorities, the red, the blue, the green, this would be 55 streets total at an estimated cost of $84.2 million. And then we have our service center. So that was the last facility we looked at. We know that this would combine several buildings into one. It's got a lot of nuance to it. The cost, I know, is certainly different than some of the other buildings, but it's because of the nuance of how the building would be used and certainly the square footage. So it's definitely a much larger building than some of the others that have been proposed. And so we also would have to factor in some temporary use. While those buildings were being demolished and reconstructed, we'd then have to, move staff around to other places. We'd have to factor in that cost as well, and we've done so. And so we're estimating that to be at 24.7 million. Okay, guys, we put it all together. We put all the potential projects together. And so for each of the 4 umbrellas, we've got 26.4 for the fire stations, 20.2 for the library expansions. That's if we included all of them. For the streets at 84.2, and then for the service center at 24.7 for a total of 155.5 million. We started off saying about 100 million. We got just slightly north of that. Just slightly north of that.
So just a couple things before she moves on to the next section. So you have at your place too, we went ahead and provided you the printouts of the presentation for tonight so that you would have them to look at as we're going through. But also, we're gonna finish up this meeting tomorrow. We're gonna be sending you out a survey, as we told you before, that would have you kind of thinking through and giving us some feedback on which projects you want to do, on how you would rank the projects, on an amount of money that you think is palatable to the voters, and also on what you think is palatable in terms of a tax rate impact. Now, Trudy's going to, the rest of this presentation, she's going to go through that. She's going to talk about debt capacity. She's going to talk about how much that amount of debt would impact the tax rate if we spread it out over a 10-year period. So keep that thought in mind too, because one of the questions you'll also get is the amount of time for the project. So it'll ask you, for example, 5 to 7 years, 7 to 10 years. What that means is the impact on the tax rate would be greater if it's less number of years to do the projects. So she's going to go through that in some detail. But think about that as we go along. The other thing to think about, and she's going to talk about this just a little bit, is that if you put a proposition up for a general obligation bond and the voters turn it down, you can't issue any debt on that, even certificate of obligation bonds, for 3 years. So one of the things that we're also going to ask you and to be thinking about, are there any of these projects that if you wouldn't want to put them up as a bond proposition, would you want to recommend that the council consider issuing certificate
of obligation bonds for those. So just kind of think about that as we go through, and then when we get through the rest of it, there'll be plenty of time for y'all to ask questions, to discuss these points. We'll send out the survey, get those results back from you, and then at the next meeting, then we're going to get into talking about you all deciding and reaching a consensus on an amount of money for the voters to consider, projects, that kind of thing. So, and how to separate them out into propositions. So anyways, Trudy.
Okay, so 155 million, if you all were to support that moving forward, it would be the largest bond that the city would have considered, that our residents would have considered. But now we're going to talk about, what's happened in the market and, what sort of bonds, how much, what types of projects have cities presented to their citizens in the last couple of years to help with context around what's happening for city bond elections. We'll start with the city of Dallas, certainly a much bigger city than us, but they did recently have a bond election in 2024. You can see that there were a total of 10 propositions, all of them passed, and the total bond was for $1.25 billion with a B. The city of McKinney held a bond election also in 2024. 4 out of their 5 passed. One proposition that did not was to build a municipal court facility, and the total bond that did pass was at $485 million. The city of Louisville had 4 propositions, all of them passed in 2024. The total amount for the total bond package was $263 million. And what you see here on the other side is just from the websites of these various cities, how they have articulated information about their bonds and their election. The city of Plano held an election in 2025. All 7 propositions passed. That total amount was for $647 million. The city of Frisco presented to their citizens a bond for a performing arts center for $160 million. It did not pass. And the city of Garland had 4 propositions, all of which passed at $360 million. You can see an overview of what types of projects that was for. The city of Flower Mound had 2 propositions in 2025 that passed. The total amount was $112 million. And finally, the city of Roanoke had a bond election last year. It was a single proposition, just one. It was for $62 million. One of the things that you'll notice here on how they articulated information about the election itself is that the total amount that would be spent for the project was $170.2 million, but they were only asking the citizens for $62 million of that cost. They were looking to utilize other resources, including a hotel partnership and other things, to pay for the total cost of the project. So they were very clear to say, this is the portion we're asking for, but this isn't the total cost in order to make the project happen. Just wanted to be sure to point that out. As Paulette mentioned earlier, looking at things like COs and other options is just one of the ways that we could consider how you all may want to move forward for discussions. Okay, so this is for all my math friends. We're going to get into some heavy spreadsheets, okay? We're all fair warned. You do have oh, someone's excited. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. You do have copies of the information in front of you. I will say if we need to provide it to you larger, we're happy to do that as well. But we're going to walk through some numbers. So as a reminder, only a portion of what people pay in property taxes to the city goes towards debt. For the city of North Richland Hills, our current adopted tax rate is 0.497841. And of that, 30% goes towards debt. The rest of it is helping to pay for ordinary operations and cost of the city. So we're only talking about this 30% when we talk about the debt rate. This is a spreadsheet that outlines how much the city is paying from our property taxes for debt every year. This is in dollar amounts. The darker area is showing what is due to be paid based on our current debt schedule. The lighter area is showing the difference between if our payments stayed the same as they are right now in fiscal 26, all the way through fiscal year 44, which is when all of our debt would be satisfied. It's geographically showing what would be the amount of debt we could issue and still stay within that same dollar payment. Does that make sense? So right now, we're set every year for the amount to fall. We do that on purpose to provide capacity and value to the citizens. But if we were to just stay the same, we actually have room in there that we call debt capacity, where we could issue debt and keep our payment the same year over year for the next several years. The bond election that we're discussing would occur in November of 26, but our fiscal year starts in October. So it's not going to affect the next fiscal year's rate. It would not affect the tax rate until fiscal year 28. So I want everyone to just remember we're talking about the tax rate in a couple of years from now, okay? So the recommended projects and their respective costs determines what the tax implications will be. We're going to talk today as if everything at 100% you all want to move forward with, but the truth is, depending on how we move any of the assumptions, that's going to change the tax rate implication. Each project will stand as a separate consideration for voters on the ballot. So remember, we do separate propositions. So even for the voter, it's not all or nothing. As Paulette said earlier, any project that voters reject is prohibited from utilizing certificates of obligation for 3 years. So we couldn't just say, well, the voters don't want to do it and impact the tax rate, but we still really need it to happen. So in 3 months, we're just going to go, city council could vote for that to happen in debt issuance. We can't do that. So we have to be careful about if you put it up there, and if on the off chance the citizens don't support it, we just want you all to have that full disclosure. It's not something we could just turn around and do very quickly. We are going to present a scenario with the highest potential amount because that allows the committee to consider all the options. However you all want to proceed, as you provide back to us in the survey and future discussions, we'll certainly update from there. Again, the total projected cost potential is at $155.5 million. As a reminder, debt would not be issued all at once. It's not like we just go all at one time and say, hey, I need $155 million in cash. We actually would have this based on a schedule that includes several factors: design timeline, total cost, our debt capacity, and also market conditions. We're going to be sensitive to what's happening in the market, when is a good time to actually issue that debt. We are proposing a 10-year issuance cycle that would start in fiscal year 28 and would go all the way through fiscal year 37 in order to maximize the opportunity to have a consideration before our citizens. So this is an eye chart. Let's just digest it for just a second. We're starting with August of 27, which would impact the tax rate in fiscal 28. Does that make sense? So that's what we're doing in this column. And then we're talking about issuances that go all the way through August of 36, which would be affecting the tax rate in fiscal year 2037. So this is an illustration that is showing a dollar amount if we were to get to $155,695, how much would be issued each year of those fiscal years to get to that total amount. It also is showing how much would be paid every year in actual debt payments for that issuance. So you can see how it is also scaling down as we've done with our other debt. And so we've got debt falling off on a scale there so that in out years there would theoretically be capacity because of how it's coming down over time. This spreadsheet takes that same information and now we're going to expand it a little bit. So first column is just showing you the fiscal year. Second column is showing you total assessed value. We always go into debt scenarios extremely conservative. We have used our taxable assessed value from 2025, which is the last time we have a certified number, and we're assuming it's going to stay steady. Not because we believe it's going to stay steady, because the only way to tell you the max amount is to assume this stays steady. Assume no growth happens at all, because in my projection, I can much more confidently project what my outcome is going to be if I don't change this, because a lot of this we have no say over, right? The city does not assess property. The city does not make state law that could change exemptions or other things that could impact how much we're able to receive in assessed value. As a city, we're pretty close to build out. I think we make good use of our opportunity to redevelop and to renovate existing properties, but we are fairly close to build out. So for the purpose of the illustration, this number stays constant. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so we know for sure that we're paying at 5% interest rate?
We don't. We are going, so for the purpose, so when we worked with our financial advisors, they have put in a rate that they believe is at market plus a little more to buffer for increases in what could happen in the market. So this is just an assumption. If we were to issue today, we believe that we would issue for an amount less than that. But for future years, trying to hedge what that might be, they're estimating about 5% to be safe. So the next column is just going through what we have in existing debt. Columns 4 and 5 are looking at some options we have available that would happen before the actual bond election, but perhaps we could reposition some debt, we could refund some things, we could create some more capacity, and maybe some savings by refinancing some existing debt. We may want to have a conversation at a later date with our city council about some project needs that we might want to present in a CO issuance. So we have accounted for that so that when we do our out years, we've sort of factored in everything that we could to provide you with good numbers. This next section, 6 through 15, is the same chart that you just saw. What 16 is doing, this is just tax minutia for our side of it. That's nothing that has anything to do with the decisions here. But then you've got your total amount that we would look to be tax supported. So column 18 is the big one. Column 18 is what's showing you for only the debt portion of our tax rate. Only the portion that's paying for debt. So not the big portion that's paying for daily operations, but that 30% that's paying for debt, what that tax rate would be. So you see in the very top one, we're paying right at 15 cents now. We would project next year that we'd be at about 15 cents. But if the committee and if the council and if the citizens all said, let's go for 155 million, we can see that our tax rate then becomes 19 cents on the debt portion. It stays at 19 cents and then starts coming down. Okay, so the most that we are projecting for that change in the INS rate to be is a total of 4 cents, to go from the 15 to 19, which is what happened when we built City Hall. That was the number we said, that was the number that happened. We did not go over that. We could comfortably make that number happen according to our projections. If the committee and the council and the citizens say the same for this particular discussion, we would look to do no more than 4 cents for this as well. Now, if any of the assumptions change, right? If the property values change, if the interest rates change, if you all decide more projects or less projects, any of the assumptions change, we would need to go back and take a look at then what does that mean for the INS rate. What we wanted to do was put you all in a position where you knew, okay, where are we on the top end? And from there, you can decide where you want to go. The other thing to keep in mind is we have assumed a 10-year issuance cycle. That means we can't fix every street year one, right? Because we don't have the money year one to do all the projects. So you can see, based on the dollar amounts that are happening each year, we certainly could deliver a facility in the first 4 years. And we also could have some funds to do streets also. But we know streets need design. Sometimes utilities have to move. Sometimes we have to purchase right-of-way. Sometimes we have to do some drainage. There could be some considerations with streets that make it so that we're not under construction day one, right? So we've considered that also in terms of how we would look to ladder the debt and the issuance. So we factored in staff capacity into these timelines as well.
The other thing on that, you have to.
So one is the state law requires that if you're going to issue debt, you have to state that it's going to increase taxes, and you have to state an amount in which it would increase taxes. So we have to sort of know that number. But like Trudy said, whether or not that amount actually, the tax rate actually increases by that amount depends on a lot of different factors. So as an example, for the 2020 bond election, we told the voters that their tax rate might go up as much as 4 cents if all of the projects were approved. But what actually happened is in that time frame, we've decreased the tax rate 11 cents because of values and different factors, but mostly values. Because value, again, like Trudy said, we did the same thing in 2020. We estimate flat values, and we estimate kind of an average interest rate based on what we've seen the last few years. So I can also tell you the interest rates have fluctuated a lot since that 2020 election. I think we had one issuance that was as low as 1%, and we were seeing that for a while. And then interest rates jumped, and I think our highest interest rate was around 3.5%, 4%, which we thought was still good because other cities were seeing debt issuance interest rates of about 5%. 5 to 6%. So, and all that has to do that, interest rates, but also our bond rating plays a lot, and we have a great bond rating. So that credit rating is what that's equivalent to. So, just saying that to say it can all fluctuate, but you have to have a number that is realistic and based on some kind of factual estimates to be able to say, voters, your tax rate could go up this much, and then it's 4 cents, and then you heard Trudy say 4 cents this time. But again, the length of time, we were going to issue that debt over 5 to 7 years, 5 years, so that compressed it. But if you spread it out and your debt issuance and your payments, again, we can keep it in the 4 cents at $155 million over 10 years. Does that make sense? Anyways, so a lot of different factors can happen that we aren't going to be able to figure out today, but this is just our best guess estimates.
So this is the same slide I showed you in August. In August, we talked about how much is an average North Richland Hills single family value in terms of taxable value, and it's at $285,000 at our current tax rate. Again, only the debt portion of the tax rate, because that's all we're talking about this evening. People are paying right at 15 cents for every $100 of value, which would be right at $428 per year. If the tax rate were to increase, again, on the debt side only, by 4 cents, then that average amount would be at $541, which is a difference of $114.06 per year. So that's both the tax rate difference and the dollar amount difference on an annual basis for consideration. Paulette mentioned it. I want to reiterate that we want to know what you all think. We want to hear how you want to prioritize the projects, the time length, the dollar amount, the tax rate implications, etc. We have given you a lot of information from August forward. We hope that you will look back at some of that information, that you'll pull out that handy dandy notebook, that you will potentially go back and rewatch some of the meetings if you have time to do that, that you'll maybe talk to your neighbors and you'll gut check it and you'll really mull over what your thoughts are. We're asking that you all participate in a survey on your own time. We're not going to do that live today, but we'll provide you with that information, I think, tomorrow. We are going to ask, though, that it's due back on the 10th because we need to have time to analyze what your thoughts are as a group so that we can bring that information back to you at the next meeting. The goal is for us to continue to discuss it, but to get that feedback from you in those individual surveys. We're happy to take any questions you have. We do have people representing all the departments who have projects before you, so we're happy to answer any questions.
Mark?
You may have gotten into this, but the details of fire station number 3, is that a rebuild on the current location? Is that planned now, or does that not include their cost?
Well, you're talking about what, just the property location?
I mean, if you're not going to rebuild it there, you got to go somewhere else and buy land.
Yeah, we've looked at 2 options. One of the options is the current location. We've looked at other options purely to see will the location be suitable for the fire station location. There is some money in the estimates for property purchases. It's just gonna depend on the
Yeah.
property itself. That's gonna be more of a,
Yeah.
Built into construction costs.
correct.
Right.
That's my-
But I'm going to say that, but I'm also going to say, so like the chief mentioned, we're looking at land now, and if an opportunity arises to purchase a piece of property that makes sense for either station, we would take advantage of that opportunity to do that. But there is some money built in for land costs. Yeah.
Sean?
I got two main questions. One, assuming best case scenarios and we go under budget on some of the projects, what happens to the money, assuming we already issued the debt for it? Do we just use that leftover money to pay down the debt, or does it go somewhere else? What happens to that if we're under budget?
So our first goal would be to utilize the money for the purpose of the bond election. So let's say that, boy, the library came in way under budget and we happen to have some leftover funds. We would then look to see, can we use that for streets? So we would look first at what did the citizens vote for? What was the intention of the bond election itself? So we first look for other things within the program as authorized. Could we utilize the option to pay down debt early? Yes, but our first intention is to put the taxpayers' dollars to work for projects they've said are important to them.
Well, and that's why it's important how the propositions are worded, because again, we can do that as long as it's a project that was approved in the bond election. And it has to have been included in the wording of your proposition to use any of the bond funds for it, if that makes sense. So you'll notice, like on streets, we're going to include language like the street, the drainage, the utilities, any costs that could be associated with it, so that it's clear what we might spend the money on.
And then next, could we see is it possible at some point to get the tax impact at a couple of other, like, I call them milestones, I guess? Like, if we issued 100 million in debt, what would that look like instead? Because I know this is the worst case, but what if we go?
Sure. So the question was, could we do different scenarios that provided the debt issuance cost if we were at different intervals, say 100 million or 125 million, et cetera? Absolutely. And we absolutely can provide that information. We definitely want to make sure that when we get the survey results back, that tells us sort of what real specific information do you all want to see back. It does take a little bit of effort, not more than we can do, but it does take a little bit of effort, and we want to make sure that we're providing the information back based on the feedback we get from you all.
Sean, does it help that it sounds like about each penny is about 38, 39 million, right? Is that right?
That was very fast math. Wow. I am impressed.
He needs an attorney, and he does math. That's crazy.
Is it, I mean, so you're saying 4 cents will get us 155 million?
Yes. So you're just.
So,
Yeah.
So you can kind
Yes.
of step it up at 38, 39 million and kind of know what it would look like.
And that's assuming a 10-year issuance, right? Because that's the other thing. So if we were to do this for a shorter period, so for example, when we talked in August, one of the things we talked about was, okay, if we were at 100 million, I provided a scenario then. It was also 4 cents, but it was for a shorter period of time. So it was a smaller dollar amount, about the same on the tax rate, but it would be done faster. So there's more than one factor that could change exactly what that looks like.
And did you say you were assuming a 5% property value increase?
No.
No.
Property
No
taxes, we're assuming that values remain flat.
Okay,
The 5% was for interest
okay.
on the debt issuance.
Justin?
But if the rate remains flat too, you still have capacity over time, so it's not really, whatever, 35 million for every 1%, because if the rate just stays the same due to paying off debt, you gain bonding capacity.
Yes. So one of the things that we assumed within the, yes, we always have new capacity, which is, we sort of showed that illustration earlier that shows our payments are dropping off. But you'll notice the issuances are not the same dollar amount. So we're using that capacity in our assumptions for that year's issuance. So the issuance per year is not the same because it's looking at what is the capacity you have in this fiscal and what could you capture in that capacity and no more than force an increase to deliver on projects. Part of our goal in doing the scenarios was we don't need half a building in 1 year, right? We either have the money to do the building or we don't. And when we go out to do bonds and to award projects and those sort of things, we have to have the cash on hand. So we also assumed for the purpose of the illustration, we have enough money to deliver a complete project when we issue for that year, plus at least some money left over to do streets. So we've utilized that capacity plus an additional 4% in order to make this scenario happen.
So my other question is, what do people tell you about, I mean, I know you don't make projections about this, but you know, what's going to happen with inflation? These things have to be done at some point in time. They're not going to be cheaper tomorrow than they are today.
I think our service center is a good example, right? So we have factored in from all of the architecture feedback that we have gotten in order to come up with the cost estimates, not just the probable cost in today's dollar, but also a factor of inflation. Let's just say inflation it just takes a huge hike that we just could not have expected, right? Let's just say that happens. There's a few ways that we could mitigate that. Part of it is, do we happen to have had money that we've issued in bonds that has sat for 6 or 7 months that we could earn interest on, and that interest could be spent back? Because frankly, if interest rates go up for lending, interest rates also go up for how we invest. So there's a correlation there, just because of where we invest the city's money.
At the same time, construction costs
Sure.
are likely going up in that scenario too. So
Sure.
it's costing you more and your purchasing power is less, so
Agreed.
the situation gets worse and worse over
Mhm.
time. So
Yep, it definitely compounds.
in the time that you've been doing this, have you ever seen the construction costs go down?
I have seen a competitive environment from contractors that has made a project more favorable in a certain season than another. So I can't tell you that it's construction cost, but cost is what two people agree is the value at that time. So I have seen cities get in a situation where they hit a rare pocket where if you hit the market just right, contractors are hungry for work, a lot of people have been out for a while. I mean, there can be some conditions. We can't create those conditions, just like we can't create the economy. But there are times where I've seen construction be more favorable than others.
Couple questions. How have we done as far as paying off debt early? It doesn't sound like it's the thing we do anyway, based on the other answer. And if our projects come in on time, is my first question.
So in terms of paying debt off early, one of the things that we typically have done is to refund into better terms that don't extend the debt any longer, but that give us more favorable terms where we can pay it off within the same amount of time, but pay less for it. So one of the scenarios that I showed you earlier that was included in that larger spreadsheet included if we were to go back and refund some of the existing debt, what that looks like. We talked, I think, earlier about the fact that, you know, as state law goes, we change, right? And so state law has changed to say that even when it comes to your tax rate, some taxing entities did it in the past where they would set their rate in order to pay some debt and things off early. So they would set their rate at an amount higher than what the minimum amount was for that year in order to pay debt down early. And the state law has changed. We can't do that any longer. That wasn't necessarily a practice of North Richland Hills, but it was a practice of some other entities. So as we see state law change and other things, you know, we want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for future action that will meet what the law will allow, even though we can't always predict how that may change.
Other question is, and this is on the school side, so we know that there's a lot of talk about how future bonds are going to be hindered for schools at least. Is there any discussion on that with cities that you can see coming down the pike that could be an issue? No, I want her to answer. No.
Pop quiz, huh?
Dang, okay. Well, there have been various bills filed in in the legislature in previous sessions that so far have failed, specific to one, general obligation bonds and limiting what we can put up for the voters. Two, the most significant number of bills have been filed, though, limiting our ability to issue certificate of obligation bonds at all, or to restrict the amount. And so that is why one of the things that I want y'all to think about is taking advantage of our ability to issue COs I'll revert back to my development talk and call them certificates of occupancy here in a minute. I did it earlier today. But certificates of obligation bonds, so we think our time is probably limited on that, or they will, at a minimum, if they don't say we just flat out can't do it, they're going to limit to specific things that we can issue COs for. So that's the thing that's most at risk, is our ability to issue certificate of obligation bonds.
Just to add to that, they also want to make it 2/3.
Yes.
Yes.
That's
Right.
probably, that's probably. the
That's
biggest.
already being discussed, yeah.
That's probably the
Yeah,
biggest.
to file next session, yeah.
Well, they already filed it, but yes, last time it didn't make it, but they.
That's
filed
right,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, kind of following on that discussion, so I was thinking about the service center.
Mm-hmm.
And I know several of us, when we did the tour, were talking, when you see it, you see the need. But probably also, of everything on the list, the hardest thing to explain to voters and to, get them to support or to understand what the need is. And it's interesting that it's the one that failed in the last 10 years. So like, is that something we should be thinking, kind of as we put something together, like funding it with like the COs and I don't know, something like that?
Yes.
Versus everybody knows we need to work on streets and fire stations, people understand that. That's something like in this, when we go through the survey, we need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
How you actually package it to sell it, right?
Absolutely. And there can be a difference between your recommendations for projects that should happen and how would you all want to propose that they're brought forward to the community. And so it's not all or nothing. You certainly can have that as a recommendation.
So that's a good segue into, so one of the things too is that by state law, and I think we may have touched on this before, the city, we can't advocate one way or another for anything that's up for an election. But what we can do and what we will do is put out just factual and educational information. But what that means is your role from the bond committee would transition into a committee that would advocate for the different projects. And yes, that's going to be the hardest sell, but that's when you have this survey, I encourage you to talk to your neighbors, your family, your friends, and talk to them about what you've learned in this process, but also kind of get their thoughts on what would you think about that? What is because that's going to be your biggest gauge for whether that can go forward. I'll also say that typically we've issued certificates of obligation bonds for projects like water lines, sewer lines, fire apparatus, because one, they're lower amounts, but two, it's not real popular to vote. People don't understand why, water lines and sewer lines are things you have to do. So if the voters were to turn those down, we're in a pickle because you just kind of let them deteriorate.
Out of your water fund, though. They're not paid with general obligation taxes.
But we still issue bonds for those, and you could put them up for a vote. But yes, they are typically, not always, but typically paid from utility funds. Yes.
The last water and sewer certificates of obligation, are they being paid for out of the water and sewer fund now?
Yes. Any debt or any projects. Yes. And that's typically what we do. We haven't. North Richland Hills has not, to my knowledge, paid for water or sewer lines with property tax funds. It's all come out of the utility fund. Right.
Other questions?
So that's a good segue over this. Then I thought about this earlier. Then you talked about how you want to present these, and Trudy, and to say this may be near and dear to your heart, but this deal about State Bill 412 compliance. Okay, it's a noble goal to separate the children adult circulation. I get that, but it's $4 million. If it's a state bill, are there any matching funds? It says, hey, by the way, you got to do this, but if you don't, here's I mean. Maybe we talked about this, I don't remember.
No, that's typical. That's what you call an unfunded mandate. They will tell us we have to do something, but they aren't gonna provide the funds to make it happen. Yeah.
So
Mark?
what happens if we don't do that?
Well, that's a project that we will have to do, and we've already done it to some extent. This would just make a more clear delineation between the adult collection and the children collection.
Mark had a question.
Right.
over
May
here.
have missed, is November set in stone? Because there is election in May. Does it have to be in November, or can this be shoehorned into a May?
Yeah, you guys can recommend, the council was looking at November, but you could do it in May, but it would have to be May of '27 at this point, because the timing for calling an election, for calling an election for May, we'd have to call it in February. I think the deadline is around Valentine's Day. And then for November election, the deadline is mid-August. Yeah.
Election for Birdville.
And I was looking at all these bonds that y'all put on. I know you only used the last couple of years, but they're all May elections. Primarily, they passed. The last Birdville election was November of '24 that didn't. I was wondering if you have better success in November or May.
Well, our last bond election, the 2020, was in November. We'd originally planned it for May, but then COVID, and then we ended up having to push it back to November, and it passed.
And that's only a portion of the bond failed. It was the indoor practice facilities. That was the only portion that did fail. The rest of it did. There is also a push in Austin that they're going to take away the May elections, and they're November only. Now, they hadn't got any traction with that yet, but that doesn't mean they won't try again.
Someone local has done that, one of the local municipalities. I can't remember.
Doing November elections?
Oh, some of the municipalities have already just gone ahead and changed their elections to November. Yeah.
So are we gonna get this in an email, because I can zoom that larger, I can't read some of it.
Yes. So when we send you the survey tomorrow, we'll also attach the presentation, so you can zoom in and do whatever you need to do.
So the consequence would be criminal liability for the library staff, and we could go to jail for up to a year.
Okay, that was my question,
We're going to get library police. There's a question back here.
Just one of you.
Well, we don't really know. But we've.
That $4 billion and that $155 million, it's not a huge component, but it's just a concept of that. They're mandating this, but they're not funding any of it. So then if I'm a voter, I'm gonna go, well, I get what the ask is, but why am I expected to pay for all of this?
Yeah.
Eloise has a
Good
question
point.
over here. Go ahead.
I was overwhelmed in knowing we had the public service place. And so I've asked people, did you know we have this? Not anybody that I talked to knew that we had any of that. It was like a secret to them. And so I told them, and I said, and when the sand trucks come out, it'll be because we were there and we know what they were doing and blah, blah, blah. There's not enough one-on-one with the voters. Would town halls be any good for any of this? A town hall, several of them, to get North Richland Hills people in?
Yes, absolutely. So if the council decides to call an election, then we would definitely do probably several town halls to educate, again, that's the only thing we can do, about the different projects and why they're needed, those types of things. Also around budget, so even if, let's say, some of these, y'all said, well, maybe this is one the council should consider a certificate of obligation bonds, we would also make that part of our education process, because on COs, citizens can protest those as well. So we have to publish notice that we're going to issue the COs, and then citizens have a certain amount of time. They can submit a petition and protest to those COs, and then it goes through a process. So there is even though it's not up for a vote, it can be contested. So we would want to educate folks on why the council's thinking about issuing debt or choosing to issue the debt and what the need is. So yes is the answer.
So on those town halls, I mean, they're great and all, but the same people go, and nobody really is maybe 30 or 40 people. I know they're cool, they're transparent and all that stuff, but it's always the same people. Looking at Louisville, they have YouTube videos.
Right.
That shows a lot of their stuff. Is that something that NRH would do for it to show and put in y'all's little pamphlet that everybody gets the mailer on a QR code or something?
Yes.
So maybe they could see a little bit more information.
Yes, we would do as much as we can do up to the line of educating people about what it is. But we've talked about including YouTube videos, but also tours of kind of current facilities, but also newer facilities in the area. So even a service center. I know Grapevine recently redid their service center after the tornado that went through there. So yes, we definitely want to up our game in terms of and making it more available for people can just pull it up on the website. We would do some social media posts and that kind of stuff. It's also information that the advocacy committee could use also to talk about it.
What is the amount of COs that we could move?
I don't know if there's a...
So the limit to COs has to do with it can't make your tax rate go up. So the amount depends on what your capacity is at the time of considering issuance and how you structure it and those sort of things. So we could come back with a number for, okay, if we were looking in fiscal 27 or fiscal 28 or so on and so forth, we can come back to you with the number on that, but it depends on a few different factors.
Well, it just makes sense that that's an option we've been repeatedly discussing.
Sure.
So I just wondered, what is that?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yep, we'll definitely bring that back.
But that's why we usually do COs for smaller projects because of that tax rate limitation. But what's interesting about that too is even in our notice to issue COs, we have to say that this could cause your taxes to go up, even though we can't issue COs in an amount that would make your taxes go up. Yeah.
You've listed 4 different categories. Are you recommending 4 different propositions?
No, we are recommending that when we displayed the dollar amounts, that those are the umbrellas like for like. So all library was together, all fire was together, all streets were together, and the service center was there. But we want to talk with you all about what you believe to be the best way to articulate the propositions themselves. And of course, depending on the scope that you'd want to have included within those different categories, they certainly could change quite a bit in dollar amount and how it's articulated, et cetera. But really, it was just for illustration for like on the cost.
Most of the other city examples you gave us had numerous, propositions. And they did break them down to library, to streets, to drainage, and things of that nature. If that's palatable for our voters to understand and see, yep, I know I need streets. I've been to the library, yep, they're overcrowded. That it might be an easier thing for them to understand.
And the law does require that you separate out the propositions enough to where people know more specifically as you can get what that money would go towards. So that's one of the reasons we separated out the library projects. But you just have to separate them enough so they know. Like y'all remember the charter election where we had 27 propositions. And that's because of that state law that requires we had to put each issue separately. So it's kind of like that. So as long as you're giving enough separation that you're not blending like streets with library,
Right.
They know what the money's going to go to. You're good.
Okay.
And they're reading it because only one of those 26 didn't pass, so,
Right. Right.
Other questions, comments? Yeah.
I noticed in the first few years, you had you estimated somewhere around numbers in the $20 million range per year. You said when a building project is up, you have to be able to fund the whole project all at one time. So most of the building projects were in the $15 to $20 million range. So is the plan that those would be kind of front-loaded in the 10 years? And if that's the case, does that mean streets are really gonna get kind of shoved off to the back?
I wouldn't say shoved off. But here's what I would say. So we would like to be able, because of the cumulative cost of inflation, particularly for materials involved in construction, demolition, et cetera, the complexity of those projects, to be able to do the buildings more on the front side of it. However, every year allows for some streets to happen. And so when you look at the cost breakdown of streets, many of them are not going to cost $5 and $6 million per street. So it's not that streets wouldn't happen. It's not that we wouldn't issue enough debt in order to deliver on street projects. It's trying to balance even our staff capacity. Poor Bo, he also has staff who work in the service center, right? So depending on what projects are going on, the same people could be working on multiple projects. And so in trying to balance some of that staff capacity, and also looking at the fact that we do preventative street maintenance, and we do a lot of street projects in addition to this. So we would want to have money to be able to do some streets early on, also money to be able to do right-of-way acquisitions, money up front to do design work. So by the time the projects are shovel ready, they're really ready for a contractor, we can deliver the money to make that happen. One of the things we want to watch out for too is that we don't sell the debt and the money just sits. So we don't want to just, sort of buy and sell and hold. We want to make sure we're putting that money to work. And so part of scaling the timeline for the 10 years allows for that to happen reasonably as well.
Justin?
Also, if the ad valorem base does increase from flat, it allows you to condense your timelines.
It does. Yes. It is by design. We're being very conservative on our estimates because we don't know for certain what's going to happen. But yes, if we were to have our values increase faster by more in any given year, that does create more capacity.
Increase at all, not just faster.
Agreed. And
Flat for 10 years.
Sure. And many people are aware that, we did not get, residential home values reappraised this year. And we didn't for a couple of years. We're set to do that in 27. We're hopeful. But, on the residential side of the house, at least if you've got the homestead exemption, you can't go up on your taxable side by more than 10%. We also have more and more people, and we covered this in August, but more and more of our citizens are getting the disability and also the senior exemption. So we're hitting a cap for more and more of our base. So for this past year, about 30% of our homes ended up in that category. So I don't care what the value does, we don't get any more money from a property tax standpoint. So we're hedging for what's happening also within our own tax profile so that we can be as conservative as possible when we estimate, so that we don't tell the citizens a number that we can't support in terms of what would be the highest potential impact to them.
Would you be able to educate, in the education process, also make statements of how in the 2020 was your last election, right? You projected this, but here was actual. So you can show, past history shows.
Yes.
We've been very conservative with your dollars and how we spend them, and we'll be able to do more with even less tax dollars than we told you we had to use.
Absolutely.
Other comments, questions in the back? Yeah, Brianne?
I think, like you say, you have to go through and be specific about, so the voters know what they're voting on. With the service center, I know people said it, just someone walking up is gonna go, what is the service center? So you're kind of, even though you're not really allowed to advocate for it, you have to educate people. So we just have to make sure we explain it well enough on the ballot when people see it, so they don't go, service center what, and then just vote it down.
Yes, and the factual information we can provide is more than just the title. So similar to what I displayed earlier for sort of how we were advertising for, not advertising, how we were providing information back in 2003 about the service center, that was much more than just saying service center. We certainly would include a lot more description and a lot more of the rationale for the request. factual only as to what led to it even being a consideration.
I mean, service center is just such a generic.
Term, yes, agreed, sure.
That brings up a thought. I know in the last bond election, I was working with Trevino on social media. There's always this group they're negative about everything, and you're never doing this, and you're never doing that. So we had little strategies of who would like to answer from the committee, but that could be turned around in a very positive way for things like the service center. Aren't we allowed as individuals and taxpayers to come up with a campaign and show a service center and say, hey, I toured this, and then have a coordinated campaign that the city doesn't promote, because you can't do that.
Absolutely. And that's what we'd be asking you to do. Yes, you can advocate, and you can do exactly what you're saying and say, I toured this, I saw this, here's where I see the need. And you can even say, I encourage you to vote for it. The city can't say that.
Can the city supply us with whatever the pixels are needed for Facebook and Instagram, whatever it is, of some well-shot photos of the service center, or that was my body part that fell off. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You're not
Yeah.
necessarily promoting it, but you can give us some tools.
Yes, and yeah, like I was saying earlier, anything we do from an educational standpoint or pictures we have, you can certainly utilize those because they're going to be out there for the public, and then you can use them for your own advocacy campaign. Yeah. Where we have to be careful is how we word things, because it can be construed as advocacy depending on how you word it. But we don't have to be careful with pictures we put. I mean, we're not going to AI doctor it up and make it look worse than, we can't do that kind of stuff, but an actual picture of it is fine, and then you all can use those. Yeah.
Do we have to use the term service center on the ballot?
No, we just use those terms to summarize the project. Y'all knew what we were talking about. We would definitely want to be more specific, because we would, and we'd have to be more specific, because we'd need to include whatever else is included. It would be part of those costs.
Is there any opportunity to even rebrand it, away from the service center to something more, city maintenance and operations center, or something just a little more modern
Yeah,
that might
definitely.
cover more than just doing service that sounds like you're doing vehicle service or something?
Yes, absolutely. We'd love to hear those suggestions. Yeah.
Use the word streets and anything.
Well, I mean, that supports our street crew and utilities. Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, Trudy. Thank you, Paulette. Great job there. Remember, February 10th, you'll get the survey tomorrow. Make sure you get that filled out. Sleep on it, talk to your neighbors, study it. You got quite a bit of data and information they've already given us over the last however many months it's been, 4 or 5 months more. All right, at this time we get to item 7 on our agenda. It's an opportunity for citizens to address the 2025 Capital Program Advisory Committee on matters which are scheduled on this agenda for consideration by the committee but not scheduled as a public hearing. In order to address the 2025 Capital Program Advisory Committee during public comments, a public meeting appearance card may be completed and presented to the recording secretary prior to the start of this meeting tonight. Were there anyone presenting with the request? There were none. If not, remember, February 10th is your deadline, and the date of our next meeting.
It's February 17th.
February 17th is the next meeting, and so we will start that off by giving you the results on the aggregate of your survey. Your results will receive them anonymously. So I want to also say, so as you're completing the survey, if you want to keep your answers, you might want to screenshot those or whatever, because we won't, since we're allowing you to put them in anonymously, we won't be able to go back and pull up how you answered. So there's that. We'll start with that, and then we'll get into the discussion about that feedback, and then start talking about what you want to recommend to the council in terms of general obligation bonds, other things, proposition language, that kind of stuff. And then March 10th, it may be still listed on your list, but remember we changed that meeting. It'll be March 4th. So you'll have a meeting on February 17th and then on March 4th. I think we're going to be back here. February 17th, are we? Yeah, because that'll be right after. They won't have picked up the election equipment yet, so.
So February 17th, next meeting will be here, and the March 4th, more than likely, will be here also.
Yes, it will be here.
Okay? Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll stand adjourned at 7:11 tonight.